The day my best friend slapped me, I didn't stop her. I didn't fight back. I just stood there and let it happen. My cheek burned. Jasmine was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She pointed at me with shaking hands. "You stole my husband." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because no matter what I said, I knew how it sounded. Maybe I deserved to be hated. Maybe I didn't. But if you only judge me by that moment, you'll never understand how we got there. My name is Mia Ellis, and this is the story of how I became the woman everyone called a homewrecker. Jasmine Reed had been my best friend for 32 years. We met in first grade. I was the quiet little girl who never spoke unless a teacher called on me. Jasmine walked over during recess, sat beside me, and asked if I wanted to share her cookies. That was it. From then on, we were inseparable. Our parents became friends. We spent birthdays together, Christmases, family vacations. People used to joke that we were more like sisters than friends. I believed them. I trusted Jasmine with everything, every secret, every heartbreak, every dream I'd ever had. There wasn't a single person in the world I loved more as a friend. Then she met Nathan Reed. He was kind, patient, the sort of man who listened more than he talked. I remember watching them dance at their wedding and thinking, she found someone who loves her exactly the way she deserves. I cried during the ceremony, not because I was sad, because I was genuinely happy for her. When Jasmine asked me to be her maid of honor, I said yes without thinking twice. Standing beside her that day, I never imagined I'd one day be accused of destroying that marriage. Years passed. Life pulled us in different directions. Jasmine and Nathan built a beautiful home. I buried myself in work. The only serious relationship I'd ever had ended before it reached the altar. After that, I stopped believing marriage was meant for me. Whenever I joked that I'd probably end up alone, Jasmine would smile and say, "Don't worry, the right man will come eventually." I always smiled back. Why wouldn't I? She was my best friend. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was Nathan. He'd never called me directly before. His voice sounded different, quiet, exhausted. He asked if we could meet. Then he said something that stayed with me. I don't know who else to talk to. I should have said no. Maybe if I had, everything would have turned out differently. Or maybe everything had already been falling apart long before that phone call. I just didn't know it yet. Nathan was already sitting in the corner of the cafe when I arrived. He looked different. Not the confident man who used to make Jasmine laugh at every family barbecue. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. When I sat down, neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, he broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. He looked down at his coffee. "Has Jasmine always needed to be right?" I smiled a little. "You mean stubborn?" He didn't smile back. "No. I mean, does she ever admit she's wrong?" I thought about it. Honestly, I couldn't remember a single time. But that didn't make her a bad person. Everyone has flaws, right? Nathan sighed. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." He told me they'd been arguing almost every day. Not about money, not about trust, about everything. If he forgot to buy the right brand of milk, she'd ignore him for hours. If he disagreed with her, she'd somehow convince him it was his fault. He apologized constantly, even when he wasn't sure what he'd done. Then he looked at me and asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Does Jasmine ever make you feel guilty?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Like everything somehow becomes your fault." For a second, I thought about answering. Instead, I laughed it off. "That's just Jasmine. She's always been a little dramatic." Nathan forced a smile, but he didn't look convinced. Over the next few months, those conversations became more frequent. Always innocent, always about Jasmine. Sometimes he'd call, sometimes we'd meet for coffee, Sometimes he'd just sit in his car outside my apartment because he said he needed somewhere quiet to think. I kept telling him the same thing. Talk to your wife, not me. He always said he tried, but every conversation ended the same way, with him apologizing for things he hadn't done. One Friday evening, Jasmine invited me over for dinner. Everything looked perfect. The table was beautifully set. Soft music played in the background. Nathan smiled as he opened the door. If you'd walked in for just 5 minutes, you would have thought they had the perfect marriage. Then Nathan accidentally knocked over a glass of water. Silence. Jasmine didn't yell. She didn't insult him. She simply looked at him and smiled. You always do this. Nathan immediately stood up. I'm sorry. He grabbed paper towels, kept apologizing. His hands were actually shaking. I remember thinking, it's just water. But Jasmine didn't let it go. The rest of the evening, she corrected everything he said, interrupted him, finished his sentences, laughed when he mispronounced a word. Each moment was tiny, so tiny, that none of them seemed worth mentioning. But together, they felt heavy. As I drove home that night, I kept replaying the dinner in my mind. I told myself every couple had bad days. Every marriage had arguments. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Nathan. I'm sorry you had to see that. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 4 words. It wasn't your fault. I had no idea. Those 4 words would change all 3 of our lives forever. After that night, Nathan stopped pretending everything was fine. He called me almost every day. He wasn't looking for a relationship. He was looking for someone who wouldn't make him question his own memory. Sometimes we'd sit in silence for 20 minutes. Other times, he'd tell me about another argument, another apology, another night spent sleeping in the guest room. The more he talked, the more one question kept bothering me. How had I never noticed any of this before? A few weeks later, Nathan told Jasmine he wanted to try marriage counseling. She laughed. Not because she thought it was a bad idea, because she thought he was bluffing. You'll get over it. But he didn't. He booked the appointment anyway. She never showed up. Instead, she sent him a text. You're the one with the problem. You fix yourself. That was the moment something changed. Not in their marriage, in Nathan. For the first time, he stopped apologizing. 2 months later, Nathan moved out. No affair, no cheating, no screaming match. He packed 2 suitcases, left his wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and walked away. The divorce papers were filed the following week. Jasmine called me crying. She said she didn't understand what had happened. She asked if I'd speak to Nathan, convince him to come home. I promised I'd try, and I did. I met Nathan the next afternoon. He looked exhausted. I asked him if he was sure. He nodded. Then he said something I'll never forget. I don't know who I am anymore, Mia. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He just looked empty. I told him to fight for his marriage if there was anything left to save. He looked at me for a long time, then quietly said, I've been the only one fighting for years. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The divorce wasn't finalized overnight. It dragged on for months. During that time, I barely saw Jasmine. When I did, she acted as though everything was normal. She never accused Nathan. She simply smiled and kept saying, he'll come back. He always comes back. But he didn't. Almost a year after Nathan moved out, he asked if we could have dinner. Just dinner. No pretending. No talking about lawyers. No talking about Jasmine. Just 2 people trying to remember what normal felt like. That dinner became another, then another. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing him as Jasmine's husband. I started seeing Nathan, a man who laughed again, a man who smiled without looking over his shoulder, a man who finally seemed free. When Nathan asked if we could try building something together, I told him no, 3 times. Not because I didn't have feelings for him, because I knew what the world would say. He understood. So he waited. Months passed. Then one morning, I realized I wasn't protecting Jasmine anymore. I was protecting the version of her I'd believed in my whole life. So I told Nathan, yes. I never imagined that saying yes would uncover a secret buried for almost 20 years. Nathan and I didn't announce our relationship. We didn't post photos. We didn't tell our friends. We both knew how it would look, so we kept our lives quiet. For a while, it worked. Then one Saturday morning, Nathan asked if I could help him clear out the last of the boxes he and Jasmine had left in a storage after the divorce. Most of it was junk. Old photo albums, Christmas decorations, tax files. Then I found a small leather notebook tucked inside a plastic container. It wasn't locked. It didn't even look important. I almost tossed it into the donation pile. Then I saw Jasmine's handwriting on the first page. I smiled. She still writes everything down. Nathan looked over. Probably one of her old planners. I opened it. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Shopping lists, birthday reminders, appointments. Then I turned another page. 3 words. Prom. Handled. I frowned. That was strange. I flipped again. Scholarship. Handled. Another page. Caleb. Handled. My heart stopped. Caleb. I hadn't said his name out loud in almost 20 years. Caleb Foster. The man I was supposed to marry. My hands started shaking. I kept turning pages. There weren't paragraphs. There weren't explanations. Just dates and names, like someone keeping score. Then, a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. It had never been mailed. It wasn't addressed. It just said, Caleb, you don't know me, but you deserve the truth. Mia has been seeing someone from work for months. She's only with you because you're safe. Ask her about Daniel. I couldn't breathe. There was no Daniel. There had never been a Daniel. I remembered the day Caleb ended our engagement. He'd stood outside my apartment, holding my engagement ring. His eyes were full of tears. I begged him to tell me what I'd done. He only said, I can't marry someone I can't trust. Then he walked away. I spent years wondering what mistake I'd made. There hadn't been one. Someone had made it for me. I looked at Nathan. He looked just as stunned as I was. Then he quietly said, I've seen that notebook before. I stared at him. What? It used to sit in Jasmine's bedside drawer. He paused. I thought it was a journal. Neither of us spoke. I turned one more page. Near the bottom, written in neat blue ink, was a sentence that made my stomach turn. Mia doesn't even realize we're competing. Underneath it, another line. That's why I always win. The room went completely silent. Then I heard footsteps behind us. Jasmine appeared in the doorway. She looked at Nathan, then at me, then at the notebook. The color drained from her face. For the first time in 32 years. I watched Jasmine look afraid. She took one slow step toward me. Her eyes never left the notebook. Then, barely above a whisper, Where did you get that? I couldn't answer. I just stared at her, then at the notebook, then back at her. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Finally, I found my voice. What is this? She didn't answer. Her eyes never left the notebook. I opened it to the page with Caleb's name. Tears blurred the words. You wrote that letter. Silence. You lied to Caleb. She still said nothing. You destroyed my engagement. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was my breathing. Then she smiled. A small smile. almost nostalgic. I always wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. I felt the air leave my lungs. Jasmine, why? She stepped closer, looked at the notebook, then at me. You're asking the wrong question, Mia. No, I'm asking the only question that matters. Her smile widened. It was never about Caleb. It wasn't about the scholarship. It wasn't about your promotion. She paused. I stared at her. She took another step, then said the words that changed everything. It was always a competition. I shook my head. What competition? She laughed. Exactly. You never even knew we were playing. She looked at me, calm, certain, almost amused. Every time someone chose you, I needed to know they'd choose me instead. The boys, the jobs, the opportunities. I just needed to know I still could. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You ruined my life. Her expression never changed. No, I just redirected it. You would have been miserable with Caleb. You hated that company. You were never ambitious enough for management. Then she looked me straight in the eyes. I was helping you. Helping me? I took one slow step toward her. You let me spend all these years believing I wasn't good enough. Her smile disappeared, then quietly said, I never thought you'd stop believing it. Those words hit me harder than anything else she'd said, not because they were cruel, because she meant them. Every compliment, every hug, every shoulder she'd offered me to cry on had only worked because she needed me beneath her. I wasn't her best friend. I was her measuring stick, the person she compared herself to, so she could always feel like she'd won. Tears rolled down my face. You never loved me. She answered without hesitation. Of course I loved you. I just loved winning more. I looked at Nathan, then back at Jasmine. But look at us now. For the first time, you couldn't decide for me. Nathan chose me. I saw panic in her eyes. I continued, not because I asked him to, because he finally saw who you really are. She shook her head, then took another step toward me. No, you turned him against me. No, Jasmine, you did that all by yourself. The slap came so fast, I never even saw it coming. My head snapped to the side. Before she could raise her hand again, Nathan caught her wrist. She looked at him. Her voice cracked. She stole you from me. Nathan was silent. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Then he spoke. You spent your whole life making sure everyone chose you. He glanced at me, then back at Jasmine. For the first time, someone didn't. The fight disappeared from her face. No anger, no tears, no smile. She slowly pulled her hand away, turned, and walked out of the storage unit. I never saw her again. People still believe I stole my best friend's husband. Maybe some always will. They never saw what was in the notebook. They never read Caleb's letter. They never knew I'd spent 32 years losing a game I didn't even know I was playing. Sometimes, I still wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd never met Jasmine Reed. Maybe Caleb would have become my husband. Maybe I would have believed in myself much sooner. I'll never know. What I do know is that I didn't steal Jasmine's life. I simply stopped letting her control mine. So tell me, if someone spends decades stealing pieces of your future, what do you call the person who finally walks away? The villain or the survivor?